I will start. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm Sister Niluka Pereira, coordinator of Catholic Care for Children International, and I am delighted to welcome each one of you to today's webinar on Care Beyond Institutionalization, Part 1. As you are aware, Catholic Care for Children International, or we say CCCI, is the most recent initiative of the UISG that aims to support religious, especially women religious, to read the signs of the times and provide the best care possible for children. CCCI invites religious to be part of the Catholic Care for Children movement, which strongly believes that the best place for a child to grow up, regardless of a background or circumstances, is the family. Our existence begins in our families, and it was the intent of God that we are nurtured within the care and protection of our families. UN guidelines on alternative care reminds us that poverty should never be the sole cause for justification for the removal of a child from parental care, but rather it should be a signal to provide support for the families. Yet we know that millions of children are separated from their families and are living in institutions. At this time, we see women and men religious congregations coming together to respond to the needs of so many children who live in institutional settings and are vulnerable to losing parental care. Catholic Care for Children movement is a sister-led, charism-driven movement to ensure children grow up in safe, loving families or family-like environment. I acknowledge the work of the religious conferences in Uganda, Kenya, and Zambia, which initiated the work of the CCC with the support and guidance of the GHR Foundation. CCC movement is built upon three main pillars. It is rooted in the Catholic faith, which gives the mandate to care for children and other vulnerable persons. CCC is informed by social sciences, which prove the importance of a nurturing family for the holistic and healthy development of a child. CCC is aligned with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the UN guidelines for the alternative care of children. And in today's webinar, we will hear from our guest speakers on why we need to change from providing institutional care for children to family and community-based care. A warm welcome to you, Sister Bibiana Gundu, Sister Jean Queen, and Miss Sohani Fernando. We are privileged to have you with us today. We will begin the program by centering our hearts in prayer. Let's remind ourselves that we are always in God's presence. God created us out of love and for love. We are called to bring life and light to the world. Speaking to the national directors of the Pontifical Mission Societies, Pope Francis reminded them and us that things must always be renewed. Renew the heart, renew the works, renew the organizations, because otherwise we would all end up in a museum. What does such renewal mean? What will renewal do for our ministries that work with and for the children who need care and protection. God is calling us to find new ways of being and doing in this time of history. God assures us, do not be afraid. Claudia. We are trying to fix some technical problem. Some volume. Stop.
Afraid I will always be with you. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I will always be with you. Piano convert, je suis toujours avec toi. Piano convert, je suis toujours avec toi. temas não temas, eu estou sempre contigo. Não temas, não temas, eu estou sempre contigo. No temas, no temas, yo estoy siempre contigo. No temas, no temas, yo estoy siempre contigo. Temeré, io sono sempre con te. Temere, io sono sempre con te.
Sister Patricia Murray, the moderator of today's program, is the Executive Secretary of the UISG. I now invite Sister Pat to take the floor. Sister Pat, over to you, Sister.
Thank you very much, Sister Naluka, and thank you for that beautiful prayer in so many different languages. And welcome to each of you participating today, in which it is a very important event as we begin a journey and look at this important theme, care beyond institutions. Yesterday, we had on Thursday, I think, going back last week, we had an important launch of an event to do with Talitha Kum, our anti-trafficking initiative. And as I was reflecting on that day, I began to realize that the whole movement within UISG in facing the challenge of trafficking of human beings began in 1998, and it began with a single conversation when a missionary sister of Our Lady of Africa, Sister Leah Ackerman, spoke here in Rome about the challenge of human trafficking and what was facing the world. And in a sense, that's the same. This is the same pathway that we're setting out on when we look at care beyond institutionalization and look at the whole question of children and orphanages and the care that has been provided by the Catholic Church for many decades and even indeed for many centuries. Because we're looking at this in the context of today and what we should be doing and what we ought to be doing in terms of taking up the whole question of care. Care is the most beautiful concept. It's something about nurturing. It's something about fullness of life. It's something about the flowering of each human person to the fullness of his or her ability. And I suppose we've all had to acknowledge that with the best will in the world and the actions that we took in past times in terms of our care of children, particularly those in poverty and those without parents, was to think first of all of institutionalization and giving them safety, protection, and care in that context. But we know ourselves that that care is now being critiqued and examined in many parts of the world. In my own country, Ireland, in Australia, in the UK, and Canada, and elsewhere, we've had to face the challenges of the systems of the past. And so I always say today to us as religious that what we do today will be judged by the standards of 30 or 40 years hence. So we have to be people who are leading the change, who are reading the signs of the times and seeing what are the best models for care that can be offered today and looking towards the future. So I'm going to just offer a very few slides from somebody who really influences me greatly. And I'm going to share my screen and just look at a number of slides offered by John Paul Lederach. John Paul Lederach is a theologian. He's a Mennonite who has worked in the whole area of peace building. And you know, peace has to do with the shalom, the fullness of life. And he talks about change in organizations. And he offers a lot of concepts, but I'm going to present you with 4 concepts that I think can help us on our journey. The first concept he talks about is moral imagination. Now that's not moral in the sense of right or wrong, but it's moral in the sense of having a vision, having an imaginative vision. And he describes this as the capacity to recognize turning points and possibilities. The capacity to imagine something new, constructive processes, constructing something new, to give birth to what does not yet exist, and to cultivate the art of leadership so that this will happen. So in a sense, whenever we're managing change within organizations or within our way of life as religious, we're engaged in the act of moral imagining. So we're looking for turning points and possibilities. His second area was this notion of turning points. And turning points are certain moments in life that point people in a new direction. And I think we've learned from the sisters in Uganda and Kenya and Zambia that sisters can be leaders of a new of a change, pointing us in a new direction in terms of institutional care. And moving from institutional care beyond that to something else. So this is the new direction we're moving towards. John Paul Lederach refers to turning points as moments that are pregnant with new life, that often seem to come from what seems like barren ground. So it seems very difficult to change. But he would say in the midst of that barren ground, there are moments for new life. And then he talks about web watching. And that's really what you and I, as religious, would call looking at the signs of the times, looking at the webs that are happening in today's world. What he says, understand the social geography, looking at the ways that we can link with each other, connect with each other, build a web, build a platform, and be smart and flexible. Sometimes in religious life, we create things which are very good, but we continue in that way of working way beyond the time we should have changed. So we need to build in flexibility into our way of life and into our way of ministry. And then he talks about yeast. Yeast, he said, is the small group of the right people in the right place at the right time. And they create a pull in an organization. They work for change. They talk to others. They invite others to the change. And in UISG, we're developing yeast groups. If you like, you're a yeast group here today. You're people considering this change for the good of children and the good of families. So they're just my few words of introduction, going back to John Paul Lederach and thinking of what he's saying to us. He's saying, build moral imagination. He's saying to us, look for the turning points where the new possibilities are present. Watch webs, build connections, work together. And finally, be yeast groups so that change can happen in society. So as we begin today's most interesting webinar, I invite you to look at within that framework and to listen to the voices of those who will challenge us, lead us forward, and point to a new way. Thank you very much indeed.
Sister Pat, to moderate the program. You are unmute.
I'm inviting Sister Naluka to introduce the presenters to you. And at the end of each presentation, I will ask you to reflect a little on what you've heard and then to see what's stirring in your hearts and to write down your questions and your inspirations, and you'll get an opportunity to share these. Thank you very much indeed. And so over to you, Sister Naluka.
Okay, the first speaker of today's webinar is Sister Bibiana Gundu. Sister Bibiana Gundu is a member of the Institute of the Little Sisters of St. Francis. She is a senior lecturer and former head of the Department of Religious Studies, Faculty of Arts and Social Science in the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, and the current University Coordinator of Academic Linkages. Her area of specialization is African traditional culture and religion. Nevertheless, She teaches a variety of courses, including sociology of religion, ecumenism, research method, social teaching of the church, and child care practices. Apart from these areas of teaching, she is strongly inclined towards research. Currently, she is a member of the Research Management Committee for SERA, Africa, an upcoming data center housed at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. She is also passionate about presenting conference papers as a way of sharing knowledge. Recently, she presented a paper on holistic transformation in religious life during the convening of the Association of the Consecrated Women in Central and Eastern Africa. Sister Bibiana is going to talk to us today the biblical perspective on the care of children and the vulnerable, the Catholic social teaching on the same, and on the importance of the family for child well-being and development. Over to you, Sister Bibiana.
Thank you very much, Sister Niluka. So, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you a few points on childcare and practices this afternoon. It is a pleasure to do this, and I believe we are going to reflect together, and as we continue to listen, Sister Morea has given us very wonderful reflection as a startup, and so I am going to present on the care for children and the vulnerable from a biblical and Catholic social teaching perspectives. And so as a way of introduction, I want to say that children, wherever they are the most vulnerable group of people in society. They are regarded vulnerable because they are defenseless. They depend on other people. Naturally, their intellectual capacity is low. They are limited in knowledge and even in understanding of things. And therefore, they depend on you, they depend on me, they depend on the people who take care of them. And therefore, the care of children and vulnerable members of society is the challenge of everyone in the globe, is the challenge of humanity. It is our duty. It is a responsibility as a church and as a larger society.
Sister Bibiana, can you,
Yes?
can you put on your slides so that we can see them? We're just seeing the first slide.
You are not seeing them yet?
We're seeing just the first one. If you can put on your slideshow. Yeah.
Hey, imagine I thought you were seeing.
Now just click on the, you need to go up to slideshow and then first slide.
Let me see what the slideshow is. I think I'm missing on that. Don't seem to see them.
That's it. There you are. Okay.
Okay. So are we moving now? Is it moving now from your side?
Yes, you moved it. Go on to the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was about to say that the presentation focuses on three most important elements. The first one is the Bible. then the social teaching of the church, and the family as the best home for these children. And so when we look at the Bible places children at the top of its stories. The Bible places children at its heart. At the point of creation, we see God blessing Adam and Eve, and he charges them to be fruitful and increase in numbers. By so doing, in Genesis 1:28, God is simply saying to this couple, I entrust you with children because they are very important to me. They are very important to society and for the growth of humanity. And so children are a heritage from the Lord. They are offspring. They are a reward. In Psalms 127, 3-5, we see that. And so we realize that it is an honor and responsibility for anyone to be entrusted with a child. Any couple without a child, they feel miserable, and especially in Africa. For a woman that is married and they have no child, it is a misery. And in fact, the society does not look at them with respect. They are looked upon with scorn. And like they remain girls, even if they are married, the way they are looked at is not the best because children are very, very important. And so to have a child is a duty and a responsibility even before God. Now, what does the book of Proverbs tell us about children? That it is important to train our children in the way they should go. And Proverbs 22, verse 6 states, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So as we begin to bring up our children in the best way, in the best values, as they grow, when they are still young, they will grow old, having that same spirit. And so to train children is really to lead them to holistic knowledge for their intellectual growth, for their moral uprightness, for their spiritual well-being, and for all that makes a human person acceptable in society. And so integral growth of the child is for the good of the society. In Hebrews 12, verse 7, the writer here is calling on parents and saying, if you really love your children, then put them into discipline. Discipline them. Teach them good manners. Teach them the right way to live. Teach them the right speech. Teach them the right way to act. Discipline them. And then let us just have it a point here that to discipline a child is really not to treat them harshly, is not to keep beating them, is not to keep slapping them. Some parents think that is the way to go, but that is really not the way. To discipline a child is to lead them in the best way possible. Some parents will think that disciplining a child means taking the rod and hitting them up. Other parents will think that to discipline a child, especially when the child has gone wrong, is to burn their hands, to burn their fingers, so that the child can feel the pinch, can feel the pain. That's not the way. Some parents subject their children to hard work. They give them the hoe and say, you must dig, you must do this in order to pay for your mistake. Other parents will even throw their children into the bush, into the river, simply in the name of disciplining them. That may not be the best way. Now, the Bible sounds a strict warning to fathers, of course, to parents, not to provoke their children to anger, but to bring them up in the discipline that is acceptable before God, the discipline that is acceptable in society. In this case, it is not only the father. We are talking about the mother. We are talking about the siblings, the brothers, the sisters, all those around the child that is growing, the teacher in the school, the catechist that is introducing this child to the faith, the social worker, the sisters as we deal with the children in our homes and in the centers, wherever these children are found. The discipline has to be that which leads the child to the Lord. And so as we proceed, we want to say that as part of training to become useful members of society, children need to be corrected when they go wrong. Some parents kind of tend to think that this child of mine is too tender, so I should not be mentioning that you have done this, correcting them. But the Bible in Proverbs 10:17 says, whoever heeds the discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. And so as parents, if parents don't correct their children, they are leading them astray. Even those who are dealing with the children in the centers, in their homes, children need to be corrected and shown the right way to move. And so whoever spares the rod hates their children. It sounds a little bit harsh here, but that is the reality. Of course, Proverbs is simply emphasizing the need to correct children and to lead them to the right direction. And that is what someone like Tobit did to the son. And so as part of training to become useful members of society, children need to be led into the way a human being can be led. We need to listen to the children. They have their own way. They have their own thinking. They have their own things that they prefer to do. But of course, as grown-ups, we need to put them into the right perspective, but in the right manner. And so listening to children is something that helps them to grow positively. Engaging them in positive acts such as prayer. When they come from school, we are checking their assignments. We monitor their relationship just in case they get into bad company. We provide them with their essential needs. That is part of the care. That is part of the training of a child. And so let me put it this way, that when children are well-disciplined, they become an asset to society. They become an asset to the church. They become an asset to the family. But children that are not well-disciplined, they grow in a dishonest way. They steal from people. They get involved in crime-related acts, such as burning schools. For instance, here in Kenya, in the last 1 month, we have witnessed a lot of burning of schools by school-going children. And you wonder what the rationale is. It's just because these children have not been brought up in the right way, perhaps. Now, looking at the New Testament, we find Jesus at the center of the care of children. He is portrayed in the Bible as a lover of children. We witness him in Matthew 19:13-14. Parents bringing children to him to bless, and the apostles and the disciples, the people around him, are a bit uncomfortable with that. But Jesus says, no, let the children come to me. Do not hinder them. Do not send them away. They belong to me. And perhaps this is a moment for us to reflect and ask ourselves, as we deal with the children wherever we handle them, in our centers, in our homes, those in the families, what is our attitude towards them? What do we feel like? You see the police walking towards the orphanage, bringing a new child. What do you feel? Do you feel like this is another burden being added to us? Or quite often, in most of our cities, we meet beggars, children begging by the roadsides, even poor people begging. What is our attitude towards them? And so Jesus is challenging us. Jesus is here very happy with children and very happily receiving them as they surround him. And it's like, this is where I belong. Now, following the example of Jesus, we do not need to be biological parents of any child to love them, to take care of them, to protect them, and to do the best for them. And so in this act, Jesus silently invites us to treat children as people whom God values, whom God loves. And so they have a dignity to be preserved. They need our protection. They need our care. They need our love. And they need us to respect them. Looking at this student here, this student, along with others, visited an orphanage recently from our university. And I was so amazed. I mean, I loved to see this, that he is grabbing this child after hearing that the child was abandoned and thrown by the roadway and was picked and brought to the orphanage. And so he is bonding with this child with lots of compassion and love. And others did the same. And so we find that children really need our love, they need our compassion, they need our protection. Again, other than children, the Bible calls for a change of attitude towards the poor, the marginalized, the disadvantaged members of society, such as the widows, the homeless, the physically challenged, the blind, the deaf, and all those people that we meet from time to time. In Proverbs 14:31, if you mistreat the poor, you insult the Creator, and therefore treating them well is a way of honoring God, is a way of joining God in the care of these vulnerable people. And of course, Exodus 22 is saying, do not take advantage of a widow or an orphan. Exodus 23, do not deny justice to the poor people. And so really, the Bible is very clear about the care of children. And so as a whole, we are invited to see that everyone has a value, regardless of their age, regardless of their race, the color, the stature, appearance, whether crippled or impaired in any way. We are challenged to see God in these young ones that he has placed in our hands or under our care.
Sister Bibiana, you have 2 more minutes to finish, and I will stop you because there are 2 other speakers. So if you like to quickly just highlight the elements in the Catholic social teaching, that'll be very helpful.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sister Moray. And so the Catholic social teaching is actually, it specifies the care for children on the first principle there, life and dignity. And so all the church doctrines speak of the human dignity, the sacredness of life, and the need to take care of everyone around us. And that picture there emphasizes the same. The church doctrines emphasize that everyone, even children, have their rights, they have responsibilities. And so they need to be encouraged to share those abilities, to grow their talents. And so the church is very clear on that. And so what are we saying as we come towards the end of this presentation? That the family is very important for a child. It is the real home, because in the family is where there's a real love, there is happiness, there's joy. The family is the center of God's plan for the happiness and progress of his children. And so in the family, what do we find? In the family, children are happy. They find protection. In the family, children are they are engaged with their family members. For instance, looking at Jesus, he was very happy in his own family with his father and mother. They took care of him, they protected him, and that is what an ideal family could be. Looking at the daughter of Pharaoh who took care of Moses. And so belonging to a family improves the best of a child, improves the mental health, lowers the risk of behavioral problems, boosts self-confidence and esteem, helps children to grow physically and in the best way. And it also helps the families to be happy. And so this is just a photo on happiness of a family. And so all of us are called to strengthen the family because the family is very important. We support the families where these children come from. We prepare them psychologically. We prepare them, if possible, materially, so that as we are thinking of taking those children back to the community, back to their families, they can find a home where they can be experiencing love and peace. And so just to say that what happens in the family affects the entire society, hence the need for us all to support the family and to strengthen all the values that are based in the family. In conclusion, the care of children and the rest of the vulnerable population is everyone's task. Care does not only mean material support, but a holistic move aimed at turning around the child's life.
And some disturbance, no?
I'm going to can you hear me, Sister Niluka?
Yes, sister.
Yeah. Obviously, there's some problem with Sister Bibiana's connection. I'm just going to thank her for a wonderful overview, giving us a sense of the child in the family, of the challenges faced by children today. I loved her framing as the family as the real home, and the challenge that we have to strengthen the family so that the dignity and the care of the child is given full expression. I'm sorry that Sister Bibiana has left us. There was obviously some problem with the connection, but I think we've been very blessed in getting her overview. And I'll hand you on. We'll make her PowerPoint available because she has given a very good biblical and Catholic social teaching perspective that gives us a lot to reflect on. So thank you very much to her. And I'll ask Sister Niluka to introduce our second speaker.
Thank you, Sister Pat. Our second speaker is Miss Sohani Fernando. Sohani Fernando is a licensed clinical social worker on child protection, child welfare, policy, counseling, and psychosocial education. She holds a master's degree in social work from Baylor University in Texas and bachelor's degree in art, environmental studies, and biochemistry. She is a mental health consultant and counseling supervisor for children and families in Sri Lanka and the USA. She was the national consultant in drafting the policy for the alternative care for children Sri Lanka, which was approved by the Cabinet of Sri Lanka on 6 March 2019. She currently engages as independent consultant and psychotherapist of 3 schools in Sri Lanka. Sohani provides her service as lecturer, curriculum writer, grant coordinator, grant writer, case manager, community youth development coordinator. A family for every child is the vision that guides and motivates her in her passionate commitment towards its fulfillment. Sohani is going to talk to us about the importance of the family for holistic and healthy development of a child. Sohani, over to you. Sohani. She's there. Sohani, platform is for you now.
Thank you, Sister Niluka. I'm sorry, I realized I was on mute.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sister Niluka. I am so thankful to be here this evening for us from Sri Lanka. And I am excited to present to you why children thrive in caring families. My slides. Human development begins at conception. From that moment, an embryo starts the developmental process in an intricately complex manner. And after a baby's birth, each milestone is marked by exquisitely unique features, requiring undivided attention and nurturing until adulthood. John Bowlby brought forth the attachment theory in the 1960s, which draws attention to the mother-child bond. He defines attachment as a set of internal behaviors that would cause the infant to become closely related to his or her main caregiver, who is usually the mother. He said, and I quote, "Young children who, for whatever reason, are deprived of that continuous care and attention of a mother or a substitute mother are not only temporarily disturbed by such deprivation, but may in some cases suffer long-term effects which persist." So a child's development is directly impacted by that quality, the quality of the parent-child bond, marking the trajectory of a child's life. Rearing a child takes considerable devotion, and we all know that. The individualized care and the nurturing environment of a family is essential for a child to develop holistically. Children thrive best within nurturing families, regardless of whether or not that family is biological. And there's countless studies over decades of research done to attest to this fact. Let's pause and take a look at this slide really closely. What you will see are many ways in which parent-child attachments are formed and developed throughout childhood. When are children emotionally secure? When they receive individualized care and support throughout the moments of their lives. Family time is an expression of love, of care, of engagement, of fun, of encouragement, of motivation, of helpfulness, support, where parents nurture their children by paying close attention to their individual needs. This is, of course, demonstrated by the holding of a hand, by the extension of help, by mimicking, by playing, by embracing, by encouraging, by physical touch, by social emotional connections, by active listening, by responding, and by spending quality time. These somewhat simple things actually make a significant impact. Strong attachments result in high self-esteem and emotional stability, a luxury that can only be optimized within a family setting. So it is extremely vital that children get many positive experiences in life. Children express themselves not just verbally, but also non-verbally. And so an adult who is able to be alert and sensitive to these expressions and who is able to support that child through those expressions, help a child thrive. That strong bond and safe environment helps a child feel secure. And this environment actually helps a child to learn, be creative, problem solve, and develop for life. There was a study, a British National Birth Cohort study that was launched in 1946. And this is actually the longest running study on human development, where data of over 14,000 babies were collected. They were followed throughout their lives, and this study actually continues to date, done by the Medical Research Council. And one of their key findings was parents are the most significant influence for a child's cognitive development, educational outcomes, as well as occupational outcomes. And early experiences sets the course of his or her life. And additionally, those who speak to their children often, listen attentively, and are nurturing see better performance and higher achievements in life. The connection between a caring adult and a child is so significant that any deprivation of such a connection can have negative consequences. In the 1940s, Dr. Renee Spitz did extensive research on children in orphanages with high death rates. He studied two groups of young children, one in an orphanage and the other in a prison nursery setting. So in the prison nursery setting, the mothers got to be with their children. And the children living in the orphanages lived in sterile, isolated conditions because doctors at that time believed that isolating sick children in incubators would actually help them thrive. However, Dr. Spitz was able to show that the opposite was true, that those in orphanages showed developmental delays such as delayed walking and talking. Emotional deprivation due to the isolation caused actually 3 to 4 deaths per child, per 10 babies, while there were no deaths in the prison environment. So Dr. Spitz believed that the reason for this was that the babies were deprived of maternal love, maternal care, and maternal stimulation. Research conducted through decades have established also that children who are institutionalized have far more detriments than we could ever imagine. Most institutions, as we all know, are large. They are overcrowded and lack a family-like environment. We all know that there are some really great institutions, right? And even the Catholic churches have provided such great care in these homes. However, it's the large volume of children and the environment that is not conducive to that kind of nurturing that really, I'm trying to focus on that, not to say that institutional care isn't providing care, it's just to say the alternative, which is a family environment, helps a child thrive. So when children are institutionalized, that close bond to a caring adult is lost. And so no matter how well that environment is, it does not provide that nurturing condition. So a research study done in the 1990s in Romania involving 50 children from the community and 95 children in institutions. The study revealed the following, that the 50 community children had fully developed attachments, while only 3 out of 95 children had formed attachments in the children that were taken from the institutions. Additional research studies have shown that children who are institutionalized suffer from developmental delays, stunted growth, attachment deficits, neglect, dysfunctional behaviors, mental illness, low self-esteem, high stress, loneliness, and deficits in socialization and emotional connection, and failure to thrive. So what is the term failure to thrive? It was actually brought up in 1915 by Dr. Henry Dwight Chapin, who associated poverty and institutional care of infants and young children with the failure of growth and development. Historically, failure to thrive was predominantly associated with failure to gain weight due to either nutritional deprivation or maternal deprivation, or a combination of both. A child's experiences in the earliest years of life influence the functional properties of the brain. Billions of neuronal connections multiply through repeated use. So the more we use these connections, the more they get stronger. And what does not get used either fades away or gets miswired. Therefore, those experiences in early childhood and into childhood are extremely important. It determines if a child will have a strong or weak foundation. Experiences shape the process for all future learning, behavior, health, and overall development. It is very important that children get as many positive experiences as possible. There's another systematic review conducted in 2020 by Dr. Philip Goldman and a group of experts, and they brought to attention the associations between institutional care and delays in growth, cognition, brain development, and competence in attention. These reviews established that the more children spent within the confines of an institute, the more the negative outcomes were. In institutions, children are isolated from their relatives and do not get to participate in various community activities. So therefore, it was revealed that when children were removed from institutions and placed in family-based care, such as foster care, the recovery was evident in major developmental areas. The Bucharest Early Intervention Project was a randomized controlled trial conducted between 2000 and 2005 of foster care as an alternative to institutional care of young children. The goal was to determine whether placing young children in foster care would enhance their developmental outcomes. So what they did was they assessed the brain and behavioral functionings, including cognitive, language, social, and then also did a bunch of psychiatric tests. So Dr. Charles Nelson and his research team tracked 136 children since 1999 between the ages of 6 and 31 months at 6 institutions in Bucharest, Romania. The researchers revealed that those who stayed in institutions had less brain activity and connections, had less white and gray matter in the brain, lower IQs, and decreased executive functioning. The study also confirmed that children who were placed with foster families had better outcomes than those who were institutionalized. I quote Dr. Nelson, "Chronic exposure to stress without a buffering relationship can lead to long-term changes in the brain. The results confirm that the negative effects on mental health as a result of early institutionalization. So for every 2 to 6 months that a child spent in a Romanian institution, there was a 1-month delay in normal development. Exposure to such conditions more than 6 months had long-term effects in intelligence. Additionally, children were found to have elevated cortisol levels due to their level of stress. And we all know that when cortisol rises, it affects every part of our bodies, including these children. Dr. Nelson's research revealed that institutionalized children were 11 times more likely to show a lack of empathy and guilt than the children placed in foster care. What we find, according to Dr. Nelson, I quote, is a very high rate of callous, unemotional traits in children, particularly amongst boys who have been in an institution. In conclusion, a child is given to his or her biological family as a precious gift from above. This gift of life has specific needs requiring an attentive response by a dedicated caregiver who is able to respond to the obvious and the subtle needs of the children with that same kind of alertness and passion. It's this kind of attentive response and social emotional connection that helps a child thrive. The nurturing family is able to provide that close human touch, the attentiveness, and the quick response needed for a child to feel confident, encouraged, loved, and developed. It is not just basic needs such as food, clothing, or shelter that children need, but a hand to hold, someone to encourage, to teach, to guide, to correct, to cheer, to mentor, and to depend on to grow in a holistic manner. A child's psychosocial needs must be met. It would be naive to believe that an institution with a large number of children would offer that level of care and psychosocial support simply because it's not practically possible. one person cannot effectively care for more than a few children at a time. But reality is that in many institutions across the globe, few hands care for multiple little ones, adding strain to the caregiver as well as hindering holistic development. There simply isn't sufficient manpower to cater to the millions of individual needs of those who are institutionalized. A family, on the other hand, has the potential to do so. Resilience within families has been extensively studied by social scientists. Although various families have their own set of struggles, they are able to be resilient. They are able to use resources and overcome challenges through relational mutual support. As such, there is no denying that children thrive in families, whether biological or not. The social sciences have strongly pointed that out, that a safe and nurturing family environment positively impacts a child's life forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sohani Fernando. Thank you for a very comprehensive overview from the social sciences. I loved your treatment of attachment and how children thrive in that kind of environment, in the context of a nurturing family. And you pointed out, in a sense, the detriments of institutionalization, even with the best will in the world. Because, as you said, only one person can only care for so many children. And your research from Romanian orphanages gave us some very practical and very clear examples of the failure to thrive, particularly at the level of brain development and emotional development. So I loved your final words around the resilience of a family, even when challenged. And also, I think the fact that children were less likely to feel empathy or guilt was an interesting perspective. So we all hope to give our children an environment where they can grow confidently, feel loved and encouraged, and their development is holistic. So thank you very much for that overview. You know, it's wonderful. We had the first perspective from Africa, second perspective from Sri Lanka. So maybe we'd like to take just a moment or two to reflect before Sister Naluka introduces our third and final speaker. So that you've listened to two speakers now. What questions is it raising for you? What questions would you like to ask them? What reactions do you feel inside yourself as you listen? And so, Sister Naluka, perhaps you can introduce our third and final speaker, Jean Quinn from UNAM.
Thank you, Sister Pat. Sister Jean Quinn is a member of the International Congregation of the Daughters of Wisdom. Her background training is in nursing, theology and philosophy, family therapy, and leadership. She is the founder of Sophia Housing, a leading organization in Ireland which works with the homeless families and single persons, committed to providing them with a holistic approach on their journey from homelessness. She has worked extensively with the Irish government for the right to housing for all and in offering alternative solutions. The organization will celebrate its 25th anniversary in 2022. Jean has served in congregational leadership as Provincial of Ireland, England, and Scotland, and for many years on the international JPIC team. She was Vice President of the Conference of Religious of Ireland. Presently, Jean is the executive director of Unanima International, a coalition of 23 congregations of religious women in 85 countries with 25,000 members, whose focus is on women, children, and girls, advocating on their behalf at the UN in New York and Geneva. She is an executive of the NGO Committee on Social Development and is co-chair of the working group to end homelessness. Sister Jean will inspire us on the international legal framework which guaranteed the rights of the child, giving focus to CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the UN guidelines for alternative care for children. Sister Jean, over to you.
Thank you very much, both Sister Pat and Sister Naluka, for that warm welcome. And I don't need to introduce myself or the Unanima International. I think we can go to slide 3. Having listened to the background in terms of the biblical background to care of children and sciences, now I'm coming from the perspective of working in advocacy at the UN, specifically for families, particularly women and children. So we're over 30 NGOs collectively representing over 200 congregations of Catholic women and men religious. As NGOs, women as religious NGOs, we bring credibility by providing insights from members' work, ministering to the poorest and most vulnerable populations on the ground. We bring impartiality as most are present in many nations and have no national identity. We bring a moral voice as faith-based groups known for a life of dedication to human dignity of all and care of the natural environment.
Next.
You okay? Religious institutes recognize that working with other like-minded groups at the United Nations offers us an opportunity to be effective advocates for more just global structures and a shared universal solidarity. While we have much in common, and all of us believe that working for justice is constitutive of the gospel, each religious community brings its own original gift and specific reading of the work of our work to the UN. So it's like we each have our own unique charism, but bringing that charism together makes a difference in terms of solidarity. I like to think of the next slide as we get in the way at the UN. So we get in the way of member states and governments because occupying spaces of power on behalf of those who can't be present in order to infuse the conversation with the perspectives, experiences, and needs that would otherwise be absent. We speak on the floor of the United Nations, or we submit written statements and recommendations. We make interventions. We look for meetings with government representatives at the UN, and we participate in our own country's political systems by voting on things or lobbying on their behalf. There's physically protesting or demonstrating, though it's not my best skill, I have to say, but that's the way it is. There's also a way of getting out of the way, and getting out of the way is also to hear the voices of people with a lived experience, like women, like families, like children. I love this particular slide because it maps our presence at the UN, and it helps us with what we're talking about today as we move forward. So I'll do this at the beginning and at the end, because as Sister Pat said at the beginning, we have to begin to have a clear focus on what we're doing. So we need to choose that. We need to monitor and gather information. That's really important. To mobilize, raise awareness with others, so to make a connection, to do direct advocacy, both at grassroots, at national and international level. And when we get to the international bit, we say we have a boomerang, because now we have advocacy, because we've done all those steps along the line. And that's really important. And so I can move on. I think I'm not going to talk too much about Catholic social teaching because I think it's well covered by the other two speakers, which is important. The only thing I wanted to talk about was the importance of the dignity of the human person and also the option for the poor, a preferential option for the poor, which is really what we are about. And that really interconnects with the SDGs. I think that's really important, is that intersectionality of what's happening with this, the Sustainable Development Goals and Catholic social teaching. So I'll move from those other two, the next two slides, to organizational change. So as organizations, religious institutes evolve and grow, and change is inevitable. As religious, we must determine at this point in our lives what to hold on to and what to replace. Change compels us to think in new and exciting ways. Creative thinking benefits our institutes with the development of many innovations and ideas that can be utilized to keep our organizations, institutes, beneficial and fruitful to those we are serving. And in this case, care reform for children beyond institutionalization. And I love the organizational consultant, which many of you know, Parker Palmer, when he describes these times as threshold times. He says they are places of beginnings that have the potential to carry us from one place to another, places of transition where we stand between no longer and not yet, the known and the unknown. They are challenging and disorientating and hopefully lead to transformation and celebration of what we have already accomplished. When we stand on the threshold, we stand before a potential entryway to change that demands wisdom and discernment. Crossing the threshold requires courage and deep inner listening. We are called now to threshold times as we reflect on our institution and reform care for children. We are standing on the edge of change with courage and attention, listening to what our wisdom God is calling to us now and anticipating our next steps. I think and I believe we leave behind an extraordinary contribution as caregivers to children, and we still have much to contribute as we enter the front line of change. When we look at reform for care for children, like our speakers before talked about, the family is the fundamental social unit of all modern societies. They are the base from which we learn to communicate, empathize, compromise, and adapt within vital structures. However, many families in our global home suffer from painful and traumatic experiences, such as homelessness, violence, poverty, and hunger. Many experience these situations simultaneously, which often leads to the breakup of families and the separation of children from loving parents. The children then can end up institutionalized in foster care systems or in alternative childcare scenarios. But none of these options is adequate or sustainable replacement for the family unit. And so it is imperative that we answer the call to provide children with safe and nurturing families. And let's look at reform care for children when we look at the numbers of children in alternative care. And of course, that varies. It's like any data that's given, it can change by the year. But in a 2017 study, it said that 2.7 million were in institutionalized care. But later, there's an estimate of 5.4. Now, it doesn't matter the numbers in some ways, but we need to look at that an estimated 50 to 100 caregivers are in a child's year for the first 2 years of their life. And that's a lot of people in a child's life. The age range when institutionalized children are most susceptible to harmful effects of institutionalization is from 6 months to 24 months. So what can we do in terms of ending institutionalization? It's a human rights priority. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child guarantees the rights of children to grow up in their family, to access education and healthcare, have an adequate standard of living, be protected from harm, and be included in the life of their community. History was made in 2019 when 193 member states of the United Nations recognized the harm that institutions cause children and called for institutions to be progressively eliminated. Now, I have all the documents in my script, which you will eventually get, and you can take time to look through them yourself. But these frameworks are really important. We all know about the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. We have the Global Compact on Migration. We have CEDAW, which is the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and we have the UN Refugee Agency. And they are all really, really important. And I think I'm going to talk about the first one, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda. They cannot be achieved without the realization of children's rights. They are universal in scope, and their call to leave no one behind puts the world's most vulnerable, including children, at the top of the agenda. Children are standing up to secure their rights. All the goals are inextricably linked to human rights and the human rights of children. We have each of the goals, poverty, hunger, health, gender, climate change, and violence against children, which is goal 16.2. And all of the Secretary Generals of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon and the present one, Antonio Guterres, they all believe that none of the goals can be realized without the family and the importance of children in the family. And he also said, Ban Ki-moon particularly, to watch for religious, because they have the answers to these things. We're on the ground, we know what we're talking about. In relation to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that the adoption of the Convention recognized children as rights holders in international law. NGOs played a significant role in its drafting and have a unique role in its monitoring and implementation. As religious, we have a significant role in the delivery of children's services in healthcare, education, in the voluntary and community settings, and in children's centres.
You've 2 more minutes, Jean, to finish. Yeah.
The general principles on the UN Convention, you'll see it in my next slide, and I'm going to bypass them because it's in the framework. But we also, children have a legal framework overview. They're entitled to the same human rights and fundamental freedoms as all individuals. But like others, particularly vulnerable groups such as women and Indigenous people, children have been given special status and protection within the United Nations framework and in general human rights treaties. And so these treaties create positive obligations of states to ensure the protection of children. I want to pop to the ones, what are children saying? Because that's really important. They ask to be heard, to be able to talk your heart out. They say, we must be heard and considered experts of life and care. Please don't overlook us in processes that involve us. We are the ones who live through the decisions by adults who may have academic knowledge or service provision, knowledge of what we live every day. And I just proposed a strategy as we move forward, because you have to begin with consultations, partnerships, advocacy, monitoring, program guidance, to transitioning, influencing policymakers, motivating policymakers, periodic reflections, and bold actions. And these are really all really important. And Pat, I have to say that this is the first time I'm saying this to a group. Last week, we had passed at the UN a significant resolution on homelessness that 193 member states have passed. First time in its history of the United Nations in 2.5 years, we had that resolution. It's going to be passed next week by the General Assembly. And 2 of us, religious, led that process with 5 member states. So that's really important. So as I conclude, there's a great opportunity for all of us here today to look at reform care for children by exploring both the challenges and best practice through a holistic approach. Throughout the presentation, we talked about reform, and we keep using the word change and transformation. For me, change means becoming familiar with reality and working to make things better by reforming care for children. Transformation is different. Transformation is about acting today to create a different future. Transformational change is radical and ultimately aims to be sustainable. Thank you, Pat, and apologies if I went over a minute or two.
Oh, thank you very much, Jean, for that overview. And, you know, it's for many who work at grassroots level and who work with families and children and in institutions, it's great to get this kind of overview, you know, to remind us that there are over 200 congregations there present at the United Nations. I loved your challenge that you're getting in the way at the UN because you're poking them from the lived experience from people on the ground. And at the same time, you spoke about getting out of the way in order to allow those whose concerns you're voicing to speak for themselves. You reminded us again, like Sister Bibiana, of the importance of Catholic social teaching, and the reminder that change compels us to think in new ways, beneficial to those whom we are serving. And I suppose the big change, and you highlighted beautifully, is that children have rights and children need to be listened to. They're the beneficiaries. And that's the huge shift, I think, that we religious are working with, that children's rights now are sacred rights and are enshrined and given special preference within the United Nations. I think as religious standing on threshold, these, as you said, are threshold times where we use wisdom and discernment to reflect where we are being called today in the whole area of care of the most vulnerable. And we have much to contribute to the change. I was particularly struck by the number of children who are institutionalized, anything between 2.7 and 5.4 million. That's a huge number, particularly when we say that the children have a right to a family, preferably their own family. And there are lots of models of their own family, extended families and so forth. I think your strategy framework will invite us to further reflection. And so I believe, thank you, Jean, for that overview. I believe the 3 of you, Sister Bibiana, and also each of you has given us, Sohani and then Eugene have given us different perspectives on which to reflect. In these threshold times, we have to engage in change. In fact, I think we're being invited to lead the change. You know, Ban Ki-moon said that where the religious are, then things can happen. So for all of us present today, I'm just going to give you a moment to collect your thoughts so we can enter into discussion with our 3 speakers. What question would you like to ask? Or what comment would you like to make? In any language. This is the beauty of the UISG platform. we can talk with each other across the languages and from our own very different perspectives. And yes, you will be getting a copy of these scripts, and yes, we will translate them into the different languages. You have shared a lot of wisdom with us, the three of you. The speakers today, somebody says here, thanks to the organizers, an excellent selection of speakers for today. So that's a lovely affirmation of the three of you. So just take a moment, participants, you can write your question in the chat box. Claudia will help me in the different languages if needed. Just raise your hand and we'll try and see you. But with over 100 participants, it's hard to see the hands. So better if you write your question or your comment in the chat box. Somebody is saying here, thank you very much for these reflections. They're very interesting and they allow us to continue our reflection. Again, other words of congratulations. Thank you. I have a question that I really want to begin by asking Sister Jean. You're engaged in advocacy at the United Nations level. What do we do on the ground in terms of advocating for children, particularly to see that governments who have signed up to the convention, the 2019 convention, that they ratify it in their own countries?
Thank you, Pat. It's a great question. I actually think that is the important place to start. And I think that we as religious who work at the grassroots need to be in partnerships and in collaboration with others who are working in the same area. So advocating, I think, locally first and then nationally, using our governments where they've signed all these different documents and where they've ratified them. I think that's really important that we do it at the local level so that we are also able to do it at the international level at the UN. So I think that's the way to start, working with local groups that we're involved with, not just ourselves. You know, I remember being in the Philippines a couple of years ago, and I was particularly interested in housing, and particularly, and the sisters were saying, well, they're all right at the moment until it came a flood and the houses went. And then the sister contacted me. She said, I think we'd better do something with the locally, whoever their local government was, in relation to housing. And they brought groups together in order to do it. So I think that's the way to do it, Pat. You know, it's that networking, you know, that map that we looked at, that's the starting point. And I found that for myself very helpful. And we do get listened to. We really do, because we have the expertise and the experience.
Thank you. Here's a question to all of you, really. Are there best practices for supporting and assisting parents to become the nurturers of their children so that they can thrive? Maybe I begin with you, Sahani.
Yes, I believe there's a lot of best practices out there based on different fields of expertise, actually. There are parenting courses, there are specific life skills support and just overall holistic support available for parents. There's teen support available in different countries where best practices on how to support families of teenagers who are raising children children. There are, courses out there for parents raising children with special needs. If they need training and equipping, there's a lot of training out there. I can't think of any names in particular, but there is lots and lots of material, and I can actually gather some together and send it to Sister Lilita and maybe share it with this group as well. But most definitely there are best practices and family strengthening programs. I think that is so important. We have a lot of families that want to raise their children, that want to nurture, but are really, really lacking the support that they need. And as a result, they have had to leave children in institutions. So definitely.
Yeah. There's just one other question was, what makes boys vulnerable in institutions, though they are confident and easily find their way? So what's the particular challenge for young men?
Is it for me? Or
Yes, I think it's for you, Sani. Yeah. Mm.
So we know that there are a lot of boys lacking a role model actually to invest in their lives, and the social sciences, the research says that boys in particular need that kind of support and mentoring and just grounding. And so when they lack that kind of support, there's dysfunctional behaviors and all of that stemming from that. So young boys are in particularly vulnerable in children's homes due to multiple reasons. There's drugs and there's trafficking and all kinds of in particular, there are drug peddlers looking out for young boys to sell it to, and I feel like the challenges there's a whole load of challenges with that, but I feel like lack of mentoring, of directing them, of investing in them to be the men that they were created to be. Some of them.
Thank you, Suhani. The connection is not so great. There's interference there.
Pat, could I make a comment there?
Yeah, sure.
That's okay. Because I think it's really important question, but not necessarily just for the boys, obviously, yeah. Our young men, yeah. It's in general. That when we just worked on this new resolution that's just been passed at the UN last week, one of the things that I insisted on was a support element, because it's all right saying, get the children back to the families and, don't break up families, don't have institutionalization, but then they have to provide the support and the care. And I think that's one of the things that we need to start working on, is that we look for that support for the children, for families, because we won't get any change unless that happens. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you. And that gives entrance to another question here in Italian. Since 2006, there aren't orphanages in Italy anymore, but it would be important to have foster homes. So how to raise awareness about this need? So who would like to answer that question?
I can jump in there. I think that we have a platform within the church to sound the alarm, to educate the church, to take on, take its place to start fostering. We can get to our congregations and empower the congregation. And foster care could look like it has many dimensions. It doesn't necessarily have to be one person keeping children in their families. They could be supporting that foster family. They could do weekends, they could do evening shifts, they could provide holistic support within the church. So I think the church is a great platform to raise raise awareness in two ways. And in Sri Lanka, there was a campaign where every church, there was a campaign to raise 3 families per church to start fostering children. So I believe the church is on that far.
Thank you very much. Sister Alice, would you like to ask your question? I see your hand raised. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Sister Pash, and thank you for all the presenters. I had put my question on the reaction chat. My point is definitely, as Sister Jean Queen mentioned, that institutionalization is not the best option. However, as we saw from her presentation, the number of children in institutions is growing from year to year, from 2017 up to around this time. It is growing and not going back. So my question is like the institutions, the need for institutions, or the need to care for the children is growing, like our need for education, a need for healthcare, etc. So how can the existing institutions be made fair enough to reduce the maladjustment of children so that they grow at least better children? Because we can see the numbers are growing, and there are some children who have no option but to remain in the institutions because they are just found, maybe thrown away. Therefore, they cannot be integrated. And in our situation here in Africa, in South Sudan, many families are grappling with their economic issues. So to have an extra child in the family is definitely a problem. Nobody would like to take an extra child in the home. So my question, how can we make existing institutions for children a better place? Thank you. What adjustments can we make? Thank you.
Shall I answer that, Pat?
Yes, Jean, you can.
Back on it.
Yeah.
It's a great question, Sister Alice, actually, and thank you for asking the question. I think institutionalization is with us at the moment, as institutions are with us. And I think what UISG are doing is starting this conversation with us is how to change, and change doesn't happen overnight. We couldn't possibly close institutions. But I think what's really important is that we look to our governments to see what we're doing. We are doing what governments are meant to be doing. And, you know, we're not going to stop all that, but we need to start advocating in a different way, because you rightly said there are economic issues. They all come into it as well. So we have to begin to look at all those stages, like I said, in that mapping of how are we going to do this. So it's not going to stop, because there are, as you said, in Africa, one of the African countries, South Sudan, where there are major issues. But I think what we're trying to do today is to begin to look at how will we change. We're not going to change overnight. So your question is wonderful. And as we said, I think we did very well in the past in terms of institutions, and we did our best. We made mistakes along the way, but we're in a change process now, and that's all you can say about it, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Thank you.
I think one of the things I might add, Sister Alice, is that we can show best practice of a new way of supporting families so that their children don't have to leave. So that, and we begin to tackle the root causes like poverty and other things. And I see Sister Bibiana would like to speak. So maybe you want to add something at this stage, Sister Bibiana. Unmute your microphone there. Sister Bibiana, you can unmute your microphone, and if you want to comment at this stage. Yes, you have.
Thank you. Yes, I've been released.
Yes, no
Thank you
worries.
very much. So I just wanted to make a comment there and say to Sister Alice, it is very important that we begin having a change of mind. We need to begin to embrace this new idea because even the children coming to the institutions started from somewhere. And so we need to begin from somewhere so that we begin getting back to the community and to the families. One thing, like I was mentioning in my presentation, we need to focus on the families and really get to the families, talk to the parents, talk to the guardians, and begin to mentor them and to show them how important it is to have these children. At the same time, I know many children run to the institutions because of poverty levels. And so this is where, like Sister is saying here, we can liaise with the government, we can liaise with organizations to begin supporting these children in terms of school fees for education and for other needs if they are able to provide. But the children remain at home, remain with their families for identity and other many benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that really echoes a question here, which is in Spanish, which says we should be thinking of families who live in poverty and violence. Which good practices could we share with parents who live in such conditions? And I suppose just my reflection on that, having worked in South Sudan, but also in thinking about contexts of violence, I think the more work we do with families in reflecting that sometimes violence in the wider society actually is mirrored by violence in the home.
Yeah.
And it can be violence in small ways. I think Sister Bibiana spoke about, you know, punishment, corporal punishment, harsh punishments to children. I think organizational theorists would say that often the local unit of the family mirrors whatever's happening in the wider society. So I think we have to have conversations about how do we move from a violent way of living with each other to a peaceful way. I learned something. I worked in Northern Ireland for several years during a time of great turmoil and lack of peace. I learned 3 words for peace. There was the Pax Romana, which means the absence of violence. But the Greeks used the word Irene, which means breaking down barriers. And then the Hebrew had the beautiful word Shalom, which is fullness of life. So for me, there are always 3 stages in peace building at every level. First of all, no violence. Second of all, work to break down the barriers of understanding. It's very easy to construct barriers against the other person or the other tribe or the other nation or the other, whoever the other is. And thirdly, then, to have a holistic vision of peace, even in a very small context that I physically, psychologically, spiritually, socially am growing. So I think there are programs to help us in that. I think we have to do a lot of community-based education in constructing a new society. We can't just write about it. We actually have to get people talking and reflecting and working together. You know, this is a question in Italian, which is if the family is the best place for children to grow up, how dangerous is it when governments claim to be the sole and indisputable guarantor of children's education through the education system? And the person writing this is saying she's concerned about guidelines on sex education and inclusion that are being imposed in schools. Now, in a way, that's a very good question, but it really leads us away from today's topic. I think my only reply to that would be to say in Catholic social teaching, it's very clear. We see the family as the the locus of the education of the child in collaboration with the state. But we have to critique whenever the state is encroaching in ways in which the family feels it should be engaged more in the discussion of how to proceed. In my context, I can speak in Ireland. Whenever change was being introduced in the curriculum, all the parties in education were involved in the discussion of the change, including families and groups representing families. So again, some of that work has to be done at the political level. I see somebody writing here from Israel who's working with migrant children and pointing out that there are often single parents who find difficulty to give quality time for their kids. Some have two families, even like a family in their country of origin and another family in Israel. And the children are affected because the parents can't do justice to the children in both families. So it's just, that's the complexity of what we're dealing with. This isn't a simple, this isn't a simple kind of question, but we have to know the reality. That's what John Paul Lederach said. Know the social geography. Know what's going on in our neighborhood. You don't have to look at the country. Know what's going on in the neighborhood. Sister Moksha writes, in India, thousands of children are being left without care if there are no institutions. My heart cries out when I see children on the street and government homes without proper care. Your presentation has helped me to understand better. What if we close down all these institutions? Now, we're not saying these institutions will close tomorrow, but we're saying we need to put other kinds of programs, to develop other kinds of programs and initiatives so that the need for these institutions. And I think we can begin by building relationship between the institution and the family. Sometimes the family just leaves the child in the institution and doesn't appear again. So what are the relationships we're building with the family? I don't know if any of you would like to comment.
I think, Pat, can I just say, as you were talking, somebody asked earlier about best practices. And again, I'm going back to the Philippines 2 years ago, because when I was in the Philippines 1 week, visiting families, the next week I was in Nairobi, the UN asked a group of experts to come and look at families and children. So I was able to talk to them about what religious were doing in the Philippines and in a slum area. And what stood out for me was that they worked with the families in what looked like Legoland, you know, these very small houses, and how they provided the children with good food every day, so that at least that the children would have good care. The novices in this place bathed the children with alternative herbs that were growing in the garden when they had something wrong with their skin. But it was all within the context of living within the families, trying to keep them there. So I do think that we as religious do have some good practices out there. We may not have best practices, but we have good practices that we can lean on as well as beginning to look at the institutions. And I think that's what I found this conversation very helpful for my own work. So I thank you very much for having this, Pat.
Yeah. Sister Nancy Wanjiro from Kenya, you have a very good question that I think we need to hear your voice. If you can unmute yourself, Sister Nancy. Thank you very much. Just unmute yourself there.
Okay, thank you. I have a concern because mostly in Africa, the children's institutions, they're like a means of source of funds, writing proposals and a project for helping children mostly to be funded. And this has been a bit of difficulty to be able to challenge the institutions, whereby they are seen it's an easy way to get the funds. And so it's wondering the strategies which we can strengthen the families, empower them, that they are able to provide the basic needs to the children, even if they are not their biological children, maybe the orphaned, that extended family is able to provide the basic needs so that the children, they will not be taken to the institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question because you're asking it at two levels. By having children in institutions, they're sometimes a source of income for us. And secondly, when the children go home, there's a financial challenge at home. So there's two economical pieces to that question, which I think is a very honest question that we have to face. So there may be somebody here present who has experience to share in that regard. It needn't just be our presenters.
As we wait for that person, Sister Moray,
Yes.
can I also chip in and say that perhaps these guardians, the parents back in the family, would need to be helped, to be empowered to begin small businesses where they can, begin to support the families, even if it is selling vegetables, just small entrepreneurship. So that, and then the centers or the sisters, when they write the proposals, can help to give little money to these families to begin a business, other than just buying food. It is eaten today and it is over, so that they don't keep looking at the center. And the children also could be engaged in a way back home so that they are not just sent to the streets. I see a very emerging practice here in Kenya. When some of these children close school, they are running into the roadsides, into the streets to beg from everyone that is driving. Yeah, so if these children are also given something to do at home, they will be engaged and they will become productive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's really a good place to come towards the end. And I'm just support that with the comment from Buenos Aires in Argentina, where the comment is, in our area, we have very destitute families and we cannot do enough. We must make many more aware, and in the meantime, pray and encourage the families. We thank you very much for these experiences and orientations that encourage us to help families and to empower them. Because one of the things we can all do together is advocate for this change, persuade funders to give support to the deinstitutionalization process, both to give funds to the religious communities who are engaged in this, and also funds to support the families. So Hani, I give you the last word before I ask Sister Naluka to finish up.
Thank you, Sister. I just wanted to add, what if some of that money that goes into institutions, into the upkeep of institutions, be channeled back into after-school programming, into family support? Something to think about. It is correct. We do run out of that money, but what if? In that sense, so keep children out of the streets, keep them out of danger, invest in curriculum and programming and training, strengthening the families to take their place to take care of the children. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure to moderate. Thank you to our speakers. We see the challenge of this enormous area, but we're beginning a journey, and we will be inviting you to participate in future webinars where together we try to see what small steps we can take. And so I'm I'm thanking each of you, Sister Bibiana, Sohani, Fernando, and Sister Jean Quinn for your wonderful presentations, which were practical and inspirational, which gives us much to reflect on. And so I hand you over to Sister Naluka with some final words, and she'll tell you about the upcoming webinar. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sister Pat, for your excellent facilitation. And I think we had a very good discussion. And now we have come almost to the end of part 1 of our program today. Part 2, as you know, is scheduled for 25th January 2022 at the same time, and can be linked using the same link. For part 2, we will be discussing the practicalities of care reform, and you will have the opportunity of meeting the leaders or the pioneers of the CCC movement from Uganda, Kenya, and Zambia will present their journey towards care reform. And really, we are happy that there are many religious men and women in all over the world. They are doing this care work indifferently. In future, we will try to bring the people who are running the new way of caring children into the global platform, so that we could able to learn from them. One request from us, we would like to have your feedback on today's webinar. You will be receiving a link on your email with the evaluation form for you to complete and send to us. Your feedback is important for us to enhance our engagement with you. Therefore, kindly fill the form and send to us. I would like to thank the 3 speakers, Sister Jean Quinn, Sister Bibiana Gundu, and Ms. Sohani Fernando, for your invaluable contribution to this webinar and for inspiring all of us on the need to change in the area of improving care for children from institutional care to one that is family and community-based, grounded on the 3 pillars of the CCC movement. Thanks to all of you for joining with us today. Till we meet again on 25th January 2022 for part 2 of this webinar. Stay safe and healthy. Hoping to meet you all in the part 2 of this webinar. God bless you. Thank you so much. You can make it so that people